Welcome to the Run Out. I am your host, Neil Barrett. Today's episode is hopefully going to be a little bit shorter as I have no guests. In fact, I don't always want to have a guest. It is not my intention to have this be an interview-based podcast. I mostly want to talk about the game as it's happening. In fact, I'd probably rather have more guests come on to be co-hosts than interviewees. But don't worry, if you enjoyed last week's episode with Kyle, I loved last week's episode with Kyle. I want to do more episodes like that from time to time. I just don't want that to be the thing that we do, more as kind of like a supplemental thing, and especially during that off-season period between the PLL and NLL when there's not a ton going on, although this year we have had many more weeks of big stories to cover. So hopefully we can kind of blend it in, but I just want all of us to kind of be on the same page about what I am expecting from this show, and that you guys will enjoy that. But with all that being said, we have lots to talk about today. We are going to get into Andy Towers stepping down, week 2 of the NLL season, and Dave Pietramala's latest recruit, as well as many more things. So without further ado, let's get into it. If you are listening to this podcast, you are almost definitely a lacrosse fan, and without a doubt, you know that the number one story this week was the resignation of Andy Towers. That happened Thursday night when Dan Arestia reported that Andy Towers and the entire Chaos coaching staff were stepping down due to the PLL wanting to replace one of his assistant coaches. Inside Lacrosse corroborated that initial report the following morning, but it wasn't until Friday evening, nearly 24 hours after Dan's initial report, that the league made the announcement and it was official. Before we get too deep into it, I want to say we do not have the whole story. We have kind of the general gist, but there are likely details that may or may not come out at some point that will shed more light onto the situation and why some of these things went down. But that being said, the entire thing has kind of felt off from the start, combining the fact that we don't have the whole story with the fact that there was no communication from the league for a good period of time meant that conspiracies ran wild. Almost all of these are at best unconfirmed, and several are completely debunked at this point. But I thought some of them we're talking about. I don't want to get into every single one of them, but we'll go over a couple of them. Rumor one that I heard the most and probably is most likely true, although it is technically unconfirmed, is that the coach in question was Matt Panetta. Due to the Chaos offense being bottom of the league and scoring only 1 goal in the semifinal game against the Utah Archers, it seems likely the Chaos defense was number 1 in the league this past year and is generally speaking towards the top almost every year. But I find this a little bit weird because while the offense wasn't good this past year, the offense hasn't been good since the bubble. It's been a bottom 3 offense every year since the bubble. They won the championship in 2021 with the second worst offense in the league, and they went back to the championship the following year with the worst offense in the league. So my question then becomes, why now? They were clearly in the middle of not just a rebuild, but a complete change to the entire offensive scheme, and still managed to make it to the semifinals by beating one of the favorites to win the entire thing in the Boston Cannon. So yeah, they weren't a great offense, and yes, they underperformed, but they still managed to be 1 game away from the championship game, even in spite of those things, while in the middle of rebuilding and redesigning their entire offense. So the timing seems a little bit weird. that was compounded with the second rumor that I heard a ton of, which was that the players initiated this, that there are several versions of this out there. That one is that they wanted it to happen. They went to Andy Towers. He said no. They went over Andy Towers' head to the PLL, and then the PLL came down to say that they wanted this person gone. Again, we don't know the details. I've also heard that the league asked the players and got their input. I've heard several different versions of this, but suffice it to say that there are many different versions that imply the players were in some manner involved in this decision. And there's this notion that if the players want a coach gone, it should happen because you can replace a coach much better and more easily than you can replace the players. And I find major flaws with that. For starters, Dane Smith and Lyle Thompson are currently headlining a long list of players that the league has been forced to replace for one reason or another, and the league is still here. Lyle Thompson left, and Asher Nolting has been basically an MVP candidate since. Dane Smith left, and Josh Byrne has stepped into that role. Connor Fields has been given time. Like, there are all these different guys, and while, yeah, I want to see those guys play, Lyle Thompson is one of my favorite players ever. This idea that the league can't continue and grow and evolve without them is bizarre, especially because we are constantly talking about how the league needs to expand and add more teams because there are so many guys sitting on the sidelines or not on a roster looking at the league from the outside in. It also is really funny because in the big four sports, we're constantly flaming guys like Aaron Rodgers and LeBron James for being these little puppet masters that are pulling strings behind the scenes and getting coaches fired and getting, they're the guys they like in that often don't perform. So it seems this weird thing that we're saying that in lacrosse it should happen, but in every other sport we talk about how it's bad. I also think that it sets a bad precedence that every time a coach makes a decision, he runs the risk of players running to the league to get him fired. And as far as I'm concerned, as long as a coach isn't doing something to cause harm, none of us want a world where this is a norm and players get to dictate to their coaches what needs to or is taking place on the field. All of this has led to questions about whether or not the PLL overstepped in asking to replace an assistant coach. On one hand, it's definitely overstepping for a league to ask one of its coaches to do anything specific with its coaching staff. Again, as I said earlier, unless that coach is doing something to cause harm to the players under his care, whether that be physical, mental, emotional, all that kind of stuff. And unless there's some kind of harm happening, then it is absolutely overstepping. On the other hand, the PLL is technically the team owner. This is a single entity league. The PLL owns all of the teams. And in that sense, no one would think twice about Jerry Jones or any other owner, for that matter, wanting to replace a coach. There's definitely this fine line that has to be walked in this single entity approach, and both thoughts have merit. I think I'm leaning slightly towards it being an overreach in this system that the PLL has set up, this single entity structure without a true GM role. The coach has been made the de facto owner in terms of making franchise altering decisions. We allow them to make trades with pretty much impunity. They can sign, they can cut, they can do whatever they want. They control their staff. And so ultimately, while PLL is technically the owner and technically has the right to fire coaches they deem need to be fired. They have installed the head coach to run the team the way he sees fit. And if they have an issue with the way the team is being run, that is on the head coach, and the head coach should be fired. It feels, again, not a major overstep because they do technically have the right to do it, but it feels like an overstep to bypass the head coach. We're going to keep the head coach who made the decision to keep that assistant coach in place because we like him and what he does for us and for the game, but we're going to control the way that he is setting up his team, is what feels like an overreach to me. The awkwardness of the whole weekend kind of event was topped off with TLN making a post 30 minutes after the official announcement that was clearly an attempt to diminish what Andy Towers had accomplished with the league. The comment sections rightfully shredded TLN for the post, including some Chaos players and other coaches, and Andy Towers himself even made a post regarding it. And it was overall just an awful look for the PLL's media arm. For those who don't know, the PLL owns TLN, to make that post, especially when you consider every other coach that has left the league, including several that were significantly worse than Andy Towers, were only celebrated on the way out. So if the goal for that was purely engagement, then, cool, I guess that's what they got. But TLN should be better than that. And I don't want to get on a soapbox about TLN. I could probably do an entire episode about TLN. And I don't want to go down that road, but suffice it to say, TLN should be better than that. And that post, along with just kind of the whole saga, leaves a pretty bad taste in the mouth of PLL fans. I don't think that it's going to lead to people tuning out or anything, but it definitely is going to take some time to repair the damage that was caused. But a good way to go about kind of repairing that damage and moving forward would be to get the right guy in that position moving forward. And that leads us to who could possibly replace Andy Towers. I am going to do an entire video of people, a much larger list and breakdown of people I think could potentially fill the role vacated by Andy Towers. So look for that on YouTube tomorrow. But there are a few names floating around, the most obvious of which is Stephen Brooks. He is currently the Atlas assistant coach. He has turned the Atlas offense into the number one offense in the league the last 2 seasons. He also was the head coach of Atlas's undefeated run to the 2023 Championship Series final, where they did lose by 1 to the Chrome in what was definitely seen at the time as an upset. And because of what took place during that championship series, a lot of people expected him to be named the Atlas head coach full time before obviously Mike Pressler was named. So I think he is definitely at the top of the list for the PLL, and barring he just doesn't want to leave Atlas, he feels like he's in a good position. I think it's highly likely that he is. I would have him as the betting favorite for this job. However, if the PLL wants to go into a slightly different direction, maybe they want to try and get a bigger name in the lacrosse world, there are 2 names that have PLL connections that I think could easily come in and take over in that area. One is Brody Merrill and the other is John Grant Jr. Both have done assistant coaching in the PLL. John Grant Jr. is currently the offensive coordinator for the Redwoods, and Brody Merrill has been involved with the Cannons. They both coach other things outside of the PLL. So, they have that kind of experience. And obviously they have the names. Brody Merrill has a PLL award named after him. So both could be kind of big names that would, big splash for the PLL if that's the direction they want to go. And then the last one that I'm going to talk about here is Joe Spallina. I don't know that it's a real likely candidate, but definitely one to look out for. He is currently the coach for Stony Brook's women's lacrosse team, but he was the former New York Lizards coach in the MLL. In fact, he coached Paul Rabel when they won the MLL championship in 2015. And because of his connection with Paul Rabel, I have to imagine that he has been asked before to coach in the PLL and has obviously said no if he is asked, because he has not been a PLL coach. But I would ask, just in case something has changed. I'm not saying that this would necessarily be the reason, but we do know that his son Joey is likely to be the number 1 pick in the 2026 draft. So maybe that plays a part, although I don't know that he will necessarily be in a position to pick his son, because even when the Chaos are bad, they are still not the worst team in the league usually. So getting the number 1 pick from that position on the Carolina Chaos team is probably not likely, but just being in the league and being able to be around his son might convince him. We will see, obviously, if he gets hired or gets involved in one way or another, what transpires, I guess. But I think that he is definitely one that I would be calling for. The kind of last thing to talk about is going to be something that we don't really have any indication on, and that is what other dominoes fall on this Carolina Chaos team. There are definitely going to be opportunities for a guy like Josh Byrne or Ian McKay or some of the other Canadian/box players to play MSL in the summer, or something else where they could potentially make more money and not have to deal with some of the things that they might deal with in the PLO. So it will be interesting to see what some of these guys choose to do over the next 6 or so months before the start of the PLL season next year. My hope, Josh Byrne is one of my favorite players. My hope is that he likes to play field and wants to be involved and stays long term. But I think getting a well-respected and known coach in there as quickly as possible is going to go a long way to staving off any kind of mass exodus for some of these guys who may have options for next summer or the summer after or any future summer. So hopefully that can take place. The Chaos are not in the championship series, so I don't know that there's going to be a huge rush. The PLO will hopefully want to get the right guy in and not just the first guy in, but I still think it needs to happen somewhat quickly so that guys aren't, looking to move elsewhere. The sooner it happens, the better it's going to be for everyone involved. Let's talk some NLL. And before we start, let me just reiterate that I am still relatively new to the NLL game. I don't necessarily have all of the details, nuances of the game figured out. So if you feel that I made a mistake in any of this or have something to input to add a detail or context or something, please, by all means, reach out, let me know, tell me what I'm missing, add that context to the discussion, whatever it is. Just remember that I'm still learning, so don't come at me for these takes. Come at me all you want for PLL takes. I'm with you there, but the NLL stuff, work with me here. We start with the Swarm beating the Seals in an overtime thriller. They were a pretty good team last year. They were only a game behind the Bandits in the regular season and went to overtime with the Bandits in the playoffs, losing obviously as the Bandits went on to win the NLL championship, but they were right there. That being said, I don't know that there were huge high expectations that they were going to be so much better. That being said, the defense did get better. They got some guys back from injury, and they signed Joey Cupido. I'm a Duke guy. I'm so used to the Caputos that I think it's Cupido, and Seth Van Scheppen were two of their big offseason signings. So the defense got better. And then Brett Dobson, yes, if you're a PLL guy, that Brett Dobson was great in goal. It was such a fun game. I am really looking forward to seeing what the Georgia Swarm do the rest of the season. I had them as out of my NLL team suggestions. I'm a huge Lyle Thompson fan, but I just wasn't. I didn't want, I think, to like the Swarm. They are technically the closest team to me in North Carolina when I was there, but moving, I don't know. I just felt like it. And then I watched that game and I was like, oh crap. I think they're back in the discussion for who my NLL team should be. So keep an eye on that. I will try to keep you guys updated on where I am with NLL team selection. Another team that I really had kind of written off, but watching them is just so much fun, is Calgary. They beat Halifax 18-17. I kind of want to say maybe that was the surprise of the weekend. Again, if you're an NLL fan, let me know how you were feeling coming into that game. At least from a newbie's perspective, it felt like a surprise of the weekend. But Curtis Dixon and Dane Doby are up there with Dane and Josh Byrne for top combos in the NLL. Each had 9 points in this game. Jesse King also added 8 assists and 2 goals for 10 points. As a PLL fan, Curtis Dixon and Jesse King are two guys I really, really miss watching. Curtis Dixon was just so good, so effortless. And Jesse King was this. There's just something about Jesse King that I have always loved. He has this kind of like swagger about him that I just love watching him play. But Calgary has the pedigree, and if they can put it all together, it's going to be incredible. I, for one, again, coming into it from a newbie's perspective, can't believe that they have remained this good without Christian Del Bianco. That seems like a huge piece that they're missing. And as of yet, they have not skipped a beat. Speaking of teams that have absolutely skipped a beat, the Toronto Rock lost again, 15-4 to the Albany Firewolves. Unfortunately, as good as the Albany Firewolves getting a bounce back win is, the story is the Toronto Rock. They are shredded by injuries. But for me, as a guy kind of entering the NLL world for the first time, to me, it's not that they are losing, because again, they have been shredded by injuries. It's how they are losing. The 11-goal loss to the Firewolves is the second worst loss in the 26-year history of the Toronto Rock. They have put up 9 goals in 2 games. Only twice has any other team at any other point in the season failed to score 9 points in 1 game this season. So it's not great. They have a goal differential of -15 in 2 games. For a team looking to finally get the monkey off its back and make a title run this season, it's not looking good. It's still early, and hopefully they can get some of those pieces back and start rolling as we go throughout the season. But it's tough for the Toronto Rock fans out there. Moving west, Colorado moves to 2-0, beating Las Vegas 15-9. They are the only team at 2-0. Perhaps it's more fair to say they are the first team to 2-0, as only 6 teams have even played a second game. But the 2-0 isn't exactly standing out just yet, because they have currently beaten 2 of the 3 worst teams from last season that were not named the Colorado Mammoth. So it's a little hard to evaluate where they are. Adam Levy on the podcast 2 weeks ago did say that he expected Las Vegas to be better this season because of some of their acquisitions. And, it's hard to penalize a team. All you can really do is play the teams that are on your schedule. It's not the Mammoth's fault that their early season schedule is against lesser teams from last season. They have done their part. They have beaten them and beaten them fairly well. So, it's hard to hold that against them. They also seem to be improving this week against Las Vegas. They had 5 players score 5 points or more. So they're getting the ball spread around. They are scoring from different places. So they look pretty good in those aspects. Dylan Ward has so far arguably been probably the comeback player of the year. He had a down season, at least by Dylan Ward standards last year. And this season so far, he has been incredible in net and has been a big part of the reason why Colorado is 2-0. If they can keep that up, who knows where they can go. They are looking currently more like the team that won the 2022 NLL championship than the team that was last in the league last year. In Rochester, the Buffalo Bandits rolled through and won 15-7 in what really, in a lot of ways, kind of felt like a home game for Buffalo. They had so many fans at that game, and the game was close for a little while, but the Bandits scored 8 in the 4th to pull away and won fairly comfortably. Dane was out there doing what Dane does, dropped 11 points, and Rochester really, really struggled to get anything going on the offensive end. The Bandits did an incredible job locking down guys like Connor Fields and preventing them from really being able to do anything that they wanted to do. The Bandits remain a heavy favorite to three-peat this season. The last thing I wanted to talk about for me as a new NLL fan is the unevenness of the schedule and how much of a killer it is. In each of the first 2 weeks, there were 4 teams not playing. I mentioned earlier, I'm a big Lyle Thompson fan, so that opening weekend not to have Lyle playing was really kind of a bummer for me. And then getting to watch Ottawa in week 1 and then go to look for an Ottawa game this week and there not being one was really tough. Week 3 is a full slate. All 14 teams will be playing, but then week 4, the weekend before Christmas, has only 4 games scheduled. So in the first 4 weeks, there will only be one weekend where every team plays. And that is really tough for me as someone trying to, find a team, find a fandom, join up and really try and pay attention this year, to not be able to see the teams and players that I want to see on a weekly basis is really, really tough. I know it will kind of balance out throughout the season. Obviously, everyone's going to end up playing the same amount of games, but it's really, really tough, especially at the beginning of the season for these kind of breaks and gaps and teams not playing, to really build my own fandom. So hopefully that's something that hopefully that's something that doesn't end up causing an issue in the long term. Once the season starts going, I can kind of get in and really sink my teeth into it. Hopefully that happens. And then maybe hopefully in the future, that is something that can change. I know it's not entirely up to them. A lot of these guys are in venues where they probably don't have complete control, and I can appreciate that. Having worked in sports, I know these things are not as easy as just, we want this to happen, so it's going to happen. But I do hope that we can get it sorted at some point. Time Time for some quick hits, some smaller, lesser stories that we can do in rapid succession. The PLL officially announced the championship series this week. It starts February the 11th and runs through the 17th. It will take place at the St. James in Springfield, Virginia, where the first two were held. The Archers, Atlas, Cannons, and Whip Snakes will take part, as well as the WLL. The game schedule was released yesterday, but not the TV schedule as of yet. Weekday games are at 7 and 9 p.m. And then there is a full slate of games on Saturday beginning at 12:30 before we get into the playoffs. The biggest news is that unlike in the previous seasons, all four teams will not make the playoffs. Only the top three will, with 2 and 3 playing each other and the number one seed getting a bye. That is an interesting wrinkle that has not happened and does kind of add a level of competition to the kind of round robin portion of the tournament. In other news, a couple of signings to talk about. I'm not going to go into all of them. There have been plenty, but a couple of the big ones. The Archers re-signed Grant Ament through 2027. 3 seasons is a fairly large deal, one for the PLL history, but most commonly you saw a 2-year deal. 3 years was pretty uncommon, but it's especially interesting to note because the PLL is going to be looking for a new TV deal after next season. As these things tend to go, you typically get more money for a new TV deal, which means that players could ask for more money. So signing a 3-year deal when that crosses that is interesting, especially for a guy like Grant Ament that the Archers are going to want to hold on to. But it is what it is. He has done it now. So that's cool. As maybe still potentially an Archers fan, I'm excited to see that. Again, as an Archers fan, Graham Hosick also extended through next season, 2025. That is good news for them. An interesting one, though, was that the Cannons re-signed Will Manny. I am really trying to figure out why you would re-sign a player that you signed last season and didn't even dress. You pulled him into those restricted spots on your roster a couple of times just so that people couldn't come get him, but you never dressed him for a game. And the only thing I can come to is that it's trade bait. And I've said this on social a few times and people came after me and was like, he could have signed with any team. They could have done it. And I just want to say, just because you sign a player with the idea of trading him, and doesn't mean that it has to take place before the start of the season. If, say, in week 2, Brennan O'Neill goes down on that left-hand side for the Outlaws, they're now looking for a left-handed attackman. Will Manny is right there, and the Cannons can say, hey, you guys want Will Manny. So that's what I mean when I say trade bait. I'm not saying that they signed him to try and get some deal done before the draft or before the beginning of the season. I just don't understand any other reason why you would sign this player that you already had on your team and were struggling from the left side. You know, they tried Matt Kavanaugh there. They tried Pat Kavanaugh there, who they have since traded. They even at one point ran Matt Campbell over there, and that none of it worked. And they had Will Manny on their roster ready to go, who the last time we saw on a PLL field was leading the Whip Snakes in points, but they didn't pull him in. So why you would re-sign that guy when you could go get someone else that you will play is baffling to me. Unless there's just something out there that we don't know. He was carrying some injury that no one ever knew about or whatever. But short of something like that, it makes no sense to me. In NLL signing news, the Philadelphia Wings acquired Michael Sowers from the Albany Firewolves. We have yet to see how this is going to play out. Sowers grew up playing box, but hasn't really played any meaningful box in many years. He did post on Instagram implying that he was going to give it a shot. And then Inside Lacrosse put out an article yesterday that said essentially that the Wings were going to take their time with him. He was not going to be dressing for this weekend's game, that they were focused more on getting him into the box and learning, the game and trying to get him up to speed. And they did not put a timetable on him playing. And then it was either last night or this morning, it was announced that he had been put on the practice roster, which is kind of what you would expect for a team that's saying they want to bring him along slowly and try and get him in the game. But as a Duke fan looking for an NLL team, the Wings are doing everything they can to get my attention. That's pretty cool. I'm a huge Sours fan too. So even before he was at Duke, when he was at Princeton, I was a big Sours fan. So they are definitely doing their part to try and get my fandom, which is a pain because I am averse to liking Philadelphia teams, not for any specific reason. I just not from Philly, don't like Philly teams, got no hate, just not a Philly fan. So it's going to be interesting and fun to see what they do. I would love to see a point in time when we get Sours and Brennan O'Neill on the turf for the Philadelphia Wings, but we will see how that goes. In football news, Jared Bernhardt broke the Whipsnakes fans' hearts when he signed for the BC Lions earlier this week. When he retired from the NFL last year, a lot of people thought that we might see him show up on a PLL field finally, but he has officially re-signed with the BC Lions of the CFL, kind of ending any speculation that that's going to happen, at least in the immediate future. Who knows how that season goes? He could, in theory, play this season. At the end of it, he retires from the CFL and still end up on a PLL field this summer. But I think the general thought right now is that puts him out of the PLL's space for the foreseeable future, at least. And then from the NBA, we got Pat Spencer. He has been getting minutes and buckets for the Golden State Warriors. He has played in 7 games so far. He's gotten about 40 minutes, which is just about a starter's worth of full game minutes. I think a starter usually gets somewhere between 38 and 40 minutes. So he's kind of right there in terms of minutes played so far this season. He's essentially played one starter's game's worth, and he has 12 points, 7 rebounds, 10 assists, and 3 steals. So that's a solid number for someone to be putting together. If he had put that all in one game, we'd say, hey, that's good. He's not Steph Curry, but he's coming off the bench and putting up some numbers. And I will hold my hands up and say I thought he was crazy when he went to Northwestern. Like, I get it. You got a passion, you got a thing, you can use an extra year of eligibility at a good school like Northwestern, and cool. And then I thought, okay, he'll come to lacrosse after that. And then he didn't. And I thought he was crazy. I thought there was no chance he was going to get to this level. I thought there was no chance he was going to get to even a high European level that was going to make it worth playing. But I will again throw my hands up and say he has proven me wrong. He has continued to climb, and he is getting NBA minutes, and there's nothing we can say about that. I still see a lot of people online that want to clown him, and I am often reminded of Brian Scalabrine. For those of you who may not know, Brian Scalabrine was a 10-year NBA pro who mostly rode the bench. He came off the bench every once in a while. He's most known for his stints in Chicago and Boston. And he tells a story about going to the YMCA, wherever he was, and trying to play ball. And some guys just clowning him and just joking, telling him he was the worst NBA player of all time and all this stuff. And he said, the thing that you don't realize is I'm closer to LeBron than you are to me. and he then blanked them in a one-on-one 21 zip and proved that he was in fact closer to LeBron than they were to him. And I think about that often because even if you are sitting on the bench in the NBA, you are a very good basketball player. Nobody cares about Pat Spencer's story. The Golden State Warriors care about whether or not he can help their team win games off the bench. So the idea that he shouldn't be there or whatever is crazy. Again, he has proven anyone who doubted him, myself included, wrong, and he deserves his spot where he is, and it remains one of the cooler sports stories of the year. And the last one is a funny little story out of Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where this morning Bill Belichick was officially announced as the new head football coach for the University of North Carolina. That started to gather some steam this weekend when reports started coming out that Belichick was in talks to become the new head coach at the University of North Carolina. And a funny little lacrosse connection is that UNC insiders are reporting that Dave Pietramala was actively recruiting Bill to be the next head coach of the Tar Heels through their very close relationship. It's said that he was recruiting through Bill to try and get him there, and with the Carolina athletic department trying to get them to get Bill there. So he was kind of working both sides. I am sure he was not the deciding factor by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a funny little story about Dave Pietramala recruiting the new football head coach based on his very close relationship with Bill Belichick. UNC insiders did a whole deep dive. I saw whole threads on their relationship and being at weddings and graduations and on the sidelines of games and stuff. They had done a lot of digging into the relationship between those two. So just a funny little story about how you never know how things are going to work out. And one of the best NFL coaches of all time is now at UNC coaching football. That is all I got for you guys today. I know the WLL released team names and branding earlier this week. Don't worry, I have thoughts. I just wanted to give it more time in the show, and the Andy Tower stuff was kind of dominating this episode, so we will cover it in full next week. If you are enjoying the podcast, do me a huge favor and like, comment, subscribe, leave a review, share it with a friend, do all those things, or don't. I'm not trying to bully you. Do what you want to do, but if you do, it will really help the podcast grow, and hopefully I can get some more cool guests on the show. All right, I'll see you guys next week.